The assignment came through the quantum relay at 600 hours Galactic Standard Time. I was finishing my morning nutrient absorption when the priority message materialized on my personal display. The Hegemony Council had selected me, Observer Zekthul of the Valerian Collective, for what they termed a routine monitoring assignment. Routine. If only I had known how laughably wrong that assessment would prove to be. The briefing was simple enough. A minor territorial dispute had erupted between the Corvan Empire and the Stellar Federation over a resource-rich system designated J7739. 3 planets, 2 with substantial mineral deposits, 1 with rare crystalline formations that powered our faster-than-light communications. Both sides had legitimate claims dating back centuries, and neither showed any inclination toward negotiation. Standard procedure called for the deployment of peacekeeping forces, but the humans had volunteered their services as mediators. The Terran Alliance, barely 2 centuries into galactic politics, had somehow convinced both warring parties to accept their intervention. The Council found this development interesting. My mission was straightforward: observe the human military in action, document their tactics and capabilities, then file a comprehensive report. The humans were still considered a curiosity by most galactic civilizations. They had achieved faster-than-light travel remarkably quickly after their first contact, but their military doctrine remained largely untested against established galactic powers. I remember thinking how fortunate I was to receive such an easy assignment. Monitor some primitive mammals playing soldier, write a report, collect my credits, and return to my comfortable research post on Valeria Prime. The irony of that thought would haunt me for months afterward. The transport to J7739 took 3 days. I shared the journey with various diplomatic personnel and supply officers, all heading to the temporary station established at the system's edge. The humans had insisted on using their own command vessel as the primary coordination hub, something that raised eyebrows among the more traditional species represented in our convoy. When we docked with the human ship, I got my first real look at Terran military architecture. Everything seemed unnecessarily robust, built with redundancies upon redundancies. The corridors were wider than needed, the walls thicker, the power systems more complex than efficiency demanded. It struck me as wasteful, though I dutifully noted these observations in my preliminary report. Commander Sarah Chen met me at the airlock. She was smaller than I expected, given the human's reputation for physical prowess, but there was something in her bearing that commanded immediate respect. Her eyes held an intensity I had rarely seen in other species, as if she were constantly calculating variables and preparing for scenarios I couldn't even imagine. "Observer Zekthul," she said, extending her hand in the peculiar human greeting ritual. "Welcome aboard the UES Determination. I understand you'll be documenting our operations here." "That is correct, Commander. The Hegemony Council is interested in human military methodologies." She smiled, an expression that seemed both welcoming and somehow predatory. "Well, you've come at an interesting time. The Corvans and the Federation are both mobilizing significant fleets. Latest intelligence suggests over 200 warships on each side. 200 ships per faction. The number didn't particularly concern me at the time. Most galactic conflicts involving fleets that size were resolved through careful maneuvering, demonstration of force, and eventual negotiation. Actual combat was rare, usually limited to brief skirmishes between small squadrons. Commander Chen gave me a tour of their ship, explaining their command structure and basic tactical philosophy. The humans organized themselves differently than most species, with multiple layers of redundant command and an unusual emphasis on individual initiative. Every officer seemed capable of making command decisions, something that struck me as potentially chaotic. What happens if your primary command structure is compromised? I asked during our walk through their tactical center. Then secondary command takes over. If that fails, tertiary. Every department head can run basic ship operations. Every squad leader can conduct independent operations if necessary. That seems unnecessarily complex. Maybe, but it means we're very hard to completely disable. Her tone suggested she had given this considerable thought. Over the next several days, I observed the humans as they conducted their mediation efforts. They met with representatives from both sides, analyzed territorial claims, proposed various compromise solutions. Their diplomatic approach seemed competent if unremarkable, I began to think my assignment would indeed prove routine. The first indication that something was wrong came during a routine sensor sweep on my 5th day aboard the Determination. The human sensor operator, a young woman named Lieutenant Torres, frowned at her displays and called for Commander Chen. "Ma'am, I'm picking up some unusual energy signatures from the Corvan fleet. They're running their weapons systems through charging cycles." "How many ships?" "Approximately 60 vessels, ma'am. Heavy cruisers and battle dreadnoughts." Chen's expression hardened. "What about the Federation fleet?" "Similar pattern, Commander. They're both preparing for combat operations." I felt a chill run through my exoskeleton. This was supposed to be a peaceful mediation. The presence of human forces should have prevented any serious military action. "Commander," I said, "surely both sides understand that aggressive action would violate galactic law. The Hegemony Council would impose severe sanctions." Chen turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made me deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't fear or concern about the developing situation. It was anticipation. "Observer, how much do you know about human military history?" "The basics. Your species has been involved in various conflicts, both internal and external. Nothing particularly unusual for a developing civilization. We've been fighting wars for our entire recorded history, not just occasional conflicts or territorial disputes. Constant brutal evolutionary warfare. Every generation, every century, every millennium. We've refined the art of organized violence to a degree that most species find disturbing." The way she said that last word made my respiratory system flutter involuntarily. "But surely," I protested, "modern galactic warfare is different. More civilized. The rules of engagement, the conventions. The rules assume that both sides want to avoid massive casualties. That destruction of infrastructure and civilian populations is counterproductive. That conquest is preferable to annihilation." She paused, studying sensor readings that showed both alien fleets continuing their military preparations. "Humans learned a long time ago that sometimes, when diplomacy fails, you have to be prepared to do terrible things to protect what matters. And right now, what matters is preventing this conflict from spreading to inhabited systems." That's when I realized I should have refused this assignment. The humans weren't here to observe or mediate. They were here to stop a war by any means necessary, and their definition of any means necessary was about to become very, very clear. The situation deteriorated rapidly over the next 18 hours. Despite continued human diplomatic efforts, both the Corvan Empire and Stellar Federation fleets began aggressive positioning maneuvers. What had started as saber rattling quickly escalated into genuine preparation for large-scale combat. I spent most of that time in the human observation deck, watching their crew work with what I was beginning to recognize as characteristic human intensity. Every station buzzed with activity, personnel running diagnostics, updating tactical databases, and conducting what they called wargaming scenarios. "Observer," Commander Chen approached my position. "I wanted to brief you on current developments before things get complicated." "More complicated than 2 fleets preparing for battle?" "Much more complicated." She activated a holographic display showing the current positions of all vessels in the system. "Intelligence reports indicate that both sides have called for reinforcements. The Corvans have dispatched their 3rd battle fleet, another 300 ships. The Federation has mobilized their core defense force, roughly equivalent numbers." My breathing apparatus nearly seized. 600 additional warships? "Commander, this is no longer a territorial dispute. This is preparation for total war." "Exactly." Her calm delivery of that single word chilled me more than any display of emotion could have. "And if it spreads beyond this system, we're looking at the first major galactic conflict in over 2 millennia. I began to understand why the humans had volunteered for this assignment. This wasn't about mediating a minor dispute. This was about preventing galactic catastrophe, and they had known it from the beginning. "What are your orders, Commander?" "Prevent the war by any means necessary. Preserve galactic stability. Protect civilian populations." She paused, meeting my compound eyes directly. "Minimize human casualties." That last addition struck me as oddly specific. "How many human ships are in this system?" "Currently, 12 vessels. The Determination and 11 escort ships. 12 ships." I let the number hang in the air, against potentially 800 enemy vessels. "Correct. Commander, I may not be a military strategist, but those odds seem challenging." For the first time since I had met her, Commander Chen smiled genuinely. It was not a comforting expression. Observer, you're about to witness something that most galactic civilizations don't understand about humans. We don't fight fair. We don't fight by the rules. We fight to win, regardless of the odds, regardless of the cost, regardless of what anyone else thinks about our methods. The first shots were fired at 13:47 hours. A Federation patrol encountered a Corvan scout squadron near the fourth planet. Within minutes, what should have been a minor skirmish escalated into a full engagement involving 40 ships from each side. I watched the battle unfold on the human tactical displays, expecting the humans to intervene diplomatically, or perhaps position themselves between the combatants. Instead, Commander Chen began issuing orders that made no sense to me. Tactical, begin deployment of Omega Protocol devices. Engineering, I want all stealth systems online. Communications, patch me through to Admiral Reeves on the UES Retribution. Commander, I interrupted, shouldn't you be attempting to stop this engagement? We are stopping it, she replied without looking away from her displays. We're just doing it our way. The human ships began moving in a pattern I couldn't decipher. Instead of the standard formation flying I expected, they scattered throughout the system in what appeared to be random positions. Some moved toward the ongoing battle, others headed for seemingly empty space, and a few actually began approaching the main enemy fleets. Commander, your ships appear to be dispersing randomly. Nothing random about it, observer. We're implementing a tactical doctrine called distributed lethality. Instead of concentrating our forces like conventional military wisdom suggests, we're spreading out to maximize our strategic options. On the tactical display, I watched the battle between Federation and Corvan forces intensify. More ships from both sides were joining the engagement, and casualty reports began filtering in. Dozens of vessels damaged or destroyed, thousands of casualties mounting by the hour. Then something unprecedented happened. The human ship UES Nemesis, one of their smaller escort vessels, suddenly appeared directly between the two fighting fleets. Not near the battle, not on the periphery, but literally in the middle of the crossfire. Commander, that ship is going to be destroyed. No, she said quietly. It's not. The Nemesis broadcast a message on all frequencies. Attention Corvan and Federation fleets. By authority of the Galactic Hegemony Council, you are ordered to cease hostilities immediately and withdraw to minimum safe distance. You have 30 seconds to comply. Both sides ignored the transmission and continued firing. The Nemesis sat motionless in space, surrounded by energy beams and missile explosions, somehow avoiding destruction through what seemed like impossible maneuvering. 15 seconds, the Nemesis broadcast again. Still no response from either fleet. Time's up, Commander Chen said softly. What happened next violated every assumption I had about modern warfare, galactic law, and the basic physics of space combat. The Nemesis fired a single projectile, not an energy beam, not a guided missile, but what appeared to be a simple kinetic slug moving at roughly 30% of light speed. It struck a Federation heavy cruiser dead center and simply erased it. Not destroyed, not damaged, not disabled. One moment there was a 3-kilometer-long warship. The next moment there was an expanding cloud of superheated plasma. The battle stopped. Every ship, Federation and Corvan alike, ceased firing and began emergency evasion maneuvers. You could almost feel the shock rippling through both fleets as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. What was that weapon? I managed to ask. Relativistic kinetic kill vehicle. Basically a tungsten rod accelerated to 30% of light speed. When it hits something, the kinetic energy release is equivalent to a small nuclear warhead, but without the radiation or electromagnetic pulse effects. That's a planet killer weapon. Actually, it's a ship killer weapon. Our planet killers are much bigger. I felt my legs give out and had to support myself against the console. How many of those do you have? Each of our ships carries approximately 200 rounds. We have 12 ships in system, 2,400 relativistic kill vehicles, each one capable of destroying the largest warship ever constructed by any galactic civilization. Commander, a voice crackled over the communication system. This is Admiral Reeves. All Omega devices are in position and armed. Awaiting your orders. Understood, Admiral. Maintain ready status. I looked at Commander Chen with what I suspect was obvious terror. What are Omega Protocol devices? Observer, do you know what humans call a dead man switch? I shook my head. It's a fail-safe mechanism. If something happens to the operator, The device automatically activates. We've placed quantum-linked explosive devices throughout this system, including near both enemy fleets and on every inhabited planet. If our ships are destroyed or if we determine that this conflict cannot be contained, the devices detonate simultaneously. You're talking about genocide. I'm talking about preventing galactic war. Sometimes the threat of unacceptable consequences is the only thing that stops unacceptable behavior. The communication console lit up with incoming transmissions from both fleets. Requests for negotiation, demands for explanation, offers of immediate withdrawal, pleas for mercy. Commander Chen ignored them all and opened a general broadcast. Attention Corvan Empire and Stellar Federation fleets. I am Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Alliance Navy. You have witnessed a demonstration of human military capability. This is your only warning. Any ship that fires a weapon, launches a missile, or makes an aggressive maneuver toward any other vessel will be immediately destroyed. You have 1 hour to begin withdrawal from this system. Non-compliance will result in the total annihilation of all military assets present. The transmission ended, leaving the system in unprecedented silence. I stared at Commander Chen, finally beginning to understand what I was truly observing. This wasn't a peacekeeping mission. This was humanity announcing its arrival as a galactic military power, and they were doing it in the most terrifying way possible. The hour that followed was the longest of my entire existence. The silence that had fallen over the system after Commander Chen's ultimatum was unlike anything I had ever experienced in decades of observing galactic conflicts. Both fleets held position, neither advancing nor retreating while their commanders presumably tried to process the reality of their situation. I found myself studying the human crew with new eyes. These weren't the primitive mammals I had expected to observe. These were apex predators who had somehow managed to weaponize mathematics and physics in ways that violated every conventional understanding of warfare. The casual efficiency with which they had demonstrated their capability to end entire civilizations was deeply unsettling. Commander, I ventured, may I ask how long your species has been planning this intervention? Planning is the wrong word, observer. We've been preparing for this possibility since we first made contact with galactic civilization. Humans have a saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And the worst-case scenario was galactic war. Billions of casualties. The collapse of interstellar civilization. She gestured toward the tactical display showing the two massive fleets. When species with access to planet-killing weapons start fighting over resources, the potential for escalation is limitless. So you developed even more powerful weapons? We developed better weapons, more precise weapons. Weapons that could end conflicts quickly rather than prolonging them. She paused, studying the readouts from their scattered fleet. Observer, do you know how many people died in the last major galactic conflict? I searched my memory banks. The Zolonian Wars, approximately 4 billion casualties over 37 years of fighting. 4 billion sentient beings dead, because nobody could or would end the conflict decisively. The fighting dragged on, consuming entire star systems until both sides were too exhausted to continue. Her voice carried a weight of conviction that made my exoskeleton tingle with unease. Humans learned long ago that sometimes the most merciful option is overwhelming force applied quickly. A chime sounded from the communications console. Lieutenant Torres looked up from her station with an expression of surprise. Commander, we're receiving a tight beam transmission from the Corvan flagship. Admiral Thekfor requests permission to negotiate. Put him through. The holographic display shimmered and resolved into the image of a typical Corvan military commander. Tall, heavily armored, with the distinctive cranial ridges that marked high-ranking members of their warrior caste. His usual species arrogance seemed notably absent. Commander Chen, Admiral Thekfor began, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into standard galactic. I must protest this unprecedented display of force. The Corvan Empire has legitimate territorial claims to this system. Recognized by Admiral, Chen interrupted smoothly. You have 53 minutes remaining before I consider your fleet to be in violation of my directive. I suggest you use that time productively. You cannot simply threaten the Imperial fleet with destruction. The Hegemony Council authorized this intervention, Admiral. They're well aware of our capabilities and our mandate. Chen's tone remained perfectly calm, which somehow made her words more menacing. You have two choices. Withdraw your fleet now, or explain to your emperor why his third battle fleet no longer exists. The admiral's facial ridges flushed dark purple, a sign of extreme agitation in Corvin's. This is unacceptable. No single species can dictate terms to the entire galaxy. We're not dictating terms to the galaxy, Admiral. We're preventing you and the Federation from starting a war that would consume it. Another transmission alert chimed. Federation Admiral Koresh appeared in a secondary display, her usual composed demeanor showing visible strain. Commander Chen, the Federation is prepared to discuss reasonable withdrawal protocols, but we cannot simply abandon our lawful territorial claims. Admiral Koresh, Admiral Thekvor, Chen addressed both commanders simultaneously. Let me clarify your situation. Our intelligence indicates that your combined fleets represent nearly 800 warships and approximately 4 million military personnel. Impressive numbers under normal circumstances. She gestured to Lieutenant Torres, who began updating the tactical display with new information. However, you should be aware that each of our 12 vessels currently has targeting solutions for every ship in both of your fleets. Our weapons have a range of approximately 1 light hour and a time to target of less than 4 seconds. Your ship's defensive systems cannot intercept projectiles moving at 30% of light speed. The mathematical implications hit me like a physical blow. The humans could engage targets anywhere in the star system almost instantaneously, while their enemies would need several minutes just to calculate firing solutions across such distances. Furthermore, Chen continued, our Omega Protocol devices are positioned throughout the system, including in orbit around both inhabited planets. Should any attempt be made to target civilian populations in retaliation, those devices will automatically detonate, sterilizing every world in this system. Both admirals appeared to be struggling with the implications of what they were hearing. You're talking about mutual annihilation, Admiral Thekvor protested. No, Admiral, I'm talking about selective annihilation. Our ships are equipped with quantum-encrypted communication systems and automated defense protocols.
Even if every human in this system were somehow eliminated, our weapons would continue operating according to predetermined parameters. I felt a chill of recognition.
The humans hadn't just prepared for this confrontation. They had anticipated every possible enemy response and developed countermeasures. This wasn't desperate improvisation. This was the execution of a plan decades in the making. What exactly are you proposing? Admiral Koresh asked. Complete withdrawal of all military assets from this system within the next 47 minutes. Both sides return to their home territories and submit their territorial disputes to binding arbitration by the Hegemony Council. No military vessels enter this system for the next 5 standard years while the arbitration process is completed. And if we refuse? Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture that reminded me uncomfortably of a predator about to strike. Then, in 47 minutes, both of your fleets will cease to exist. This system will be permanently interdicted, and the Terran Alliance will assume direct control of J7739 under the Galactic Emergency Powers Act. The Emergency Powers Act hasn't been invoked in over a millennium. It's about to be invoked now if you force our hand. I watched both alien admirals struggle with the reality of their situation. The humans had effectively checkmated them before the game had even begun. Every option led to the same conclusion. Comply with human demands or face annihilation. This is blackmail, Admiral Thekvor snarled. This is diplomacy, Chen replied calmly. Admittedly, diplomacy backed by the threat of overwhelming force, but diplomacy nonetheless. The Hegemony Council will hear about this. The Hegemony Council authorized this intervention because they understood what you apparently do not, that preventing a galactic war is worth temporary embarrassment to your species' pride. A new alarm began sounding at the tactical station. Lieutenant Torres looked up with concern. Commander, long-range sensors are detecting the arrival of additional Federation reinforcements, 60 ships heavy configuration, and Corvin reinforcements. Estimated arrival in 4 hours. Approximately 80 vessels. Both alien admirals looked startled by the news. Apparently their own reinforcements had arrived ahead of schedule, while they were unaware of the enemy's additional forces. Well, gentlemen, Commander Chen said pleasantly, it seems your choice has become even more urgent. You now have the opportunity to withdraw gracefully, Or you can explain to your respective governments how a minor territorial dispute escalated into the complete destruction of your fleets. You can't possibly engage that many ships, Admiral Thekvor protested. Actually, Admiral, we can engage exactly that many ships. Our targeting computers have already calculated firing solutions for the new arrivals. Would you like a demonstration? The silence that followed was deafening. I realized that I was witnessing the precise moment when two major galactic powers simultaneously recognized that the balance of power had fundamentally shifted. The humans hadn't just developed new weapons. They had redefined the entire concept of military superiority. Finally, Admiral Koresh spoke. What guarantee do we have that humanity will honor the arbitration results? You have our word, Admiral, and you have the knowledge that if we intended conquest rather than peace, this conversation would never have taken place. It was Admiral Thekvor who blinked first. The Corvin Empire accepts your terms, Admiral Thekvor finally said, his words coming out like they physically pained him. We will begin withdrawal immediately. Admiral Koresh hesitated for several more seconds before nodding reluctantly. The Federation also agrees to withdrawal and arbitration. Excellent, Commander Chen replied, though I noticed she didn't relax her posture at all. You have 41 minutes to begin demonstrable movement away from this system. Our sensors will track your progress. Both alien commanders terminated their communications, leaving the human bridge in relative quiet. I expected some celebration, some acknowledgement of their diplomatic victory, but the crew simply continued their duties as if forcing two major galactic powers to stand down was routine. Commander, I said, may I ask why you gave them over 40 minutes to comply when you could have simply destroyed them immediately? Because, Observer, the goal was never to destroy their fleets. The goal was to prevent a war. She moved to the central command console, studying readouts I couldn't interpret. Destroying 800 warships would have been simple. Convincing their governments that diplomacy is preferable to annihilation required a more nuanced approach. And if they had refused, then we would have destroyed 800 warships. The matter-of-fact way she said it made my breathing apparatus flutter again. There was no doubt in her voice, no hesitation, no apparent moral struggle with the concept of eliminating 4 million sentient beings. Commander, if I may observe, your species seems remarkably comfortable with the concept of large-scale destruction. Chen turned to face me fully, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked genuinely thoughtful. Observer, how much do you know about human evolutionary history? The basics. Your species evolved from persistence hunters on a planet with unusually high predator density. That's part of it. But what shaped our psychology wasn't just hunting. It was competition. Not just with other predators, but with ourselves. For hundreds of thousands of years, human tribes fought each other for resources, territory, and survival. The tribes that survived were the ones that could make the hard decisions. Quickly, she gestured toward the view screen showing the slowly withdrawing alien fleets. Most galactic species evolved in more cooperative environments. They learned to negotiate, to compromise, to find mutually beneficial solutions to conflicts. Those are valuable skills, and they work well when all parties are reasonable. But they don't work when one side is determined to fight regardless of the consequences. When diplomacy fails, when negotiation breaks down, when compromise becomes impossible, you need entities who are willing and capable of ending the conflict decisively. I was beginning to understand the deeper implications of what I was witnessing. The humans hadn't just volunteered for this assignment. They had been selected for it because of their unique psychological makeup. The Hegemony Council knew this would happen, didn't they? They suspected it might. The territorial dispute between the Corvins and the Federation has been escalating for decades. Both sides have been building military assets, making increasingly aggressive statements, and rejecting every diplomatic solution proposed by neutral parties. So, they sent humans because they knew someone might need to use force. They sent humans because we're the only species in the galaxy that can credibly threaten total destruction while still preferring peaceful solutions. Chen smiled grimly. It's a unique combination of capabilities and psychology that most civilizations find uncomfortable. Lieutenant Torres interrupted our conversation. Commander, both fleets are initiating withdrawal maneuvers. Corvin ships are moving toward the outer system boundary. Federation vessels are adjusting course for their home territories. Good. Continue monitoring their progress and maintain weapons lock until they reach minimum safe distance. Commander. I watched the tactical display as hundreds of warships began their retreat, and I couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and unease. The immediate crisis was over, but I was beginning to understand that something fundamental had changed in galactic politics. Commander, what happens now? I mean, in the broader sense. How will other species react to this demonstration of human military capability? That depends on how intelligent they are, Chen replied. The smart ones will recognize that we prevented a catastrophic war and adjust their behavior accordingly. They'll understand that humans are now a stabilizing force in galactic politics. And the others? The others will test us. They'll probe our defenses, challenge our resolve, try to find weaknesses they can exploit. Her expression hardened slightly. They'll discover that threatening galactic stability is a very poor decision. A new communication alert sounded, but this time the transmission was coming from outside the system. The holographic display resolved into the image of what I recognized as a Hegemony Council member, specifically, Counselor Vexenari of the Altarian Supremacy. Commander Chen, the counselor began, the Council has been monitoring the situation in J7739. We are impressed by the efficiency of your intervention. Thank you, Counselor. Both fleets are withdrawing as directed, and we expect full compliance within the next few hours. Indeed. However, we have received some rather urgent communications from both the Corvan Empire and the Stellar Federation. They have expressed concerns about human military capabilities. I felt my exoskeleton tense. This was the moment when the broader galactic community would react to what they had witnessed. What sort of concerns, Counselor? They claim that humanity has developed weapons of unprecedented destructive capability. They suggest that these weapons represent a threat to galactic security that requires immediate Council attention. Commander Chen's expression didn't change, but I noticed that several human officers had stopped their work to listen to the conversation. Counselor, humanity developed these capabilities specifically to maintain galactic security. We used them to prevent a war that could have consumed multiple star systems and resulted in billions of casualties. Yes, that aspect has not gone unnoticed. However, some Council members are concerned about the precedent this sets. If every species with advanced military technology can unilaterally impose peace— Counselor, Chen interrupted, may I point out that no other species volunteered for this assignment? The Corvan Federation dispute was escalating toward total war, and the traditional diplomatic approaches had failed completely. Someone had to act, and your species acted decisively, perhaps too decisively for some tastes. I realized I was witnessing the beginning of a much larger political shift. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy. And now every other species was trying to figure out what that meant for their own security and sovereignty. Counselor, Chen said carefully, what exactly is the Council's position on our intervention? The Council recognizes that your actions prevented a catastrophic war. We also recognize that your methods raise important questions about the future of galactic governance. Counselor Vexenari paused, consulting something off-screen. The Council requests that humanity provide a full briefing on your military capabilities and strategic doctrine. For what purpose? To determine whether those capabilities represent a stabilizing or destabilizing force in galactic politics. The implications were clear. The Hegemony Council was considering whether humanity had become too powerful to remain autonomous, or whether they could be trusted with their new status as the galaxy's ultimate arbiters of military force. Counselor, Commander Chen replied, humanity's strategic doctrine is simple. We will use whatever force is necessary to maintain galactic stability and protect civilian populations. We have no territorial ambitions, no conquest goals, and no desire to impose our will on other species for economic or political gain. And yet you have just imposed your will on two of the galaxy's major powers. We imposed peace on two factions that were preparing for genocide. The distinction was subtle but crucial, and I could see that Counselor Vexenari understood its implications. Very well, Commander. The Council will consider humanity's actions and determine appropriate next steps. In the meantime, you are to remain in the J7739 system until both fleets have completed their withdrawal. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in contemplative silence. Commander, I said finally. It sounds like your species may have just painted a target on itself. Maybe, Chen replied. But we also just demonstrated that we're the wrong species to target. Over the following days, as both alien fleets completed their withdrawal from the J7739 system, I had the opportunity to observe the human crew in what they called normal operations. What I discovered was that their demonstration of overwhelming force had been their version of restraint. The 12 human ships in the system represented what Commander Chen described as a light patrol, force. When I asked about the size of the full Terran Alliance Navy, her answer made my breathing apparatus seize up completely. Currently active? About 4,000 vessels ranging from corvettes to what we call system killers. We also have another 6,000 in various stages of construction or refit, 10,000 warships. For a species that had achieved faster-than-light travel less than 2 centuries ago, the scale of their military buildup was staggering. Commander, why does your species feel the need for such massive military forces? Because we studied galactic history very carefully before we started building ships, she replied. Every major war in the last 5,000 years started the same way. One side believed they had overwhelming superiority, so they acted aggressively. The other side either capitulated or fought back with everything they had. She brought up historical data on the human tactical displays, showing casualty figures and strategic analyses from dozens of past conflicts. The Zilonian Wars lasted 37 years, because neither side could achieve decisive victory. The hegemony Outer Rim conflicts dragged on for decades because the participants kept escalating gradually, hoping the other side would eventually give up. The synthetic rebellion consumed entire sectors because nobody was willing to use sufficient force to end it quickly. She highlighted specific battle analyses that showed the progression from limited engagement to total warfare. Humans learned from studying these conflicts that the most humane approach to warfare is overwhelming, decisive action. End the fight before it can escalate. Make resistance so costly that surrender becomes the rational choice. But what about diplomatic solutions? Negotiation? Compromise? Observer, we tried diplomatic solutions. We spent 3 months negotiating with both sides before this crisis reached its peak. The Corvins and Federation weren't interested in compromise. They were interested in total victory over each other. I spent the next several hours reviewing the diplomatic records the humans had maintained throughout the crisis. The documentation was exhaustive, showing dozens of proposed solutions, territorial compromises, resource-sharing agreements, and mediation attempts. Both sides had rejected every single proposal that didn't give them complete control of the disputed system. They were never going to negotiate in good faith, I realized. Exactly. So we gave them a choice: accept our arbitration or lose everything. It's not the solution we preferred, but it was the only solution that would actually work. As if to prove her point, a priority communication arrived from the Hegemony Council. This time it wasn't just Counselor Vexnari, but the full council leadership representing all major galactic civilizations. Commander Chen, began High Counselor Jekthol, the ancient leader of the council. We have completed our preliminary review of the J7739 incident. We have some questions. Of course, High Counselor. First, regarding your weapons technology. Our analysis suggests that your kinetic kill vehicles operate on principles that should be theoretically impossible, given your species' current technological development. With respect, High Counselor, our technological development may have been somewhat underestimated. Indeed. Our experts calculate that the energy requirements for accelerating projectiles to 30% of light speed should exceed the total power output of your entire civilization. Commander Chen exchanged a look with her chief engineer before responding. High Counselor, humans have always been good at finding efficient solutions to complex problems. Are you willing to share the principles behind this technology with the galactic scientific community? That would depend on the purpose for which the technology would be used. The evasion was diplomatic but clear. The humans had no intention of sharing their most advanced military capabilities with potential enemies. Second question, continued High Counselor Jekthol, regarding your Omega Protocol devices. Our long-range sensors detected quantum signatures consistent with antimatter weapons of unprecedented yield. How many such devices does humanity possess? Enough, Commander. That is not a sufficient answer for the Council's purposes. High Counselor, with respect, any number I give you would either cause panic if it's too high, or encourage aggression if it's too low. What I can tell you is that humanity has the capability to defend itself and its allies against any conceivable threat. I watched the Council members confer among themselves in the background of the transmission. They were clearly struggling with how to handle a species that had suddenly revealed capabilities far beyond what anyone had suspected. Third question, the High Counselor continued. What are humanity's intentions regarding galactic governance? Do you intend to use your military superiority to influence Council decisions? Absolutely not, Chen replied immediately. Humanity has no desire to rule over other species or dictate galactic policy. We intervened in J7739 specifically because both sides requested mediation and because the alternative was galactic war. And yet your actions have fundamentally altered the balance of power in this galaxy. High Counselor, the balance of power was already altered the moment 800 warships entered the same system with hostile intent. We simply prevented that power from being used destructively. But what happens the next time there is a similar crisis? Will humanity again impose its will through superior firepower? Commander Chen was quiet for a long moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. High Counselor, I cannot speak for all future scenarios. What I can tell you is that humanity will always prefer diplomatic solutions to military ones. But we will also not stand by and watch genocidal conflicts consume the galaxy simply because other species are uncomfortable with decisive action. And if the Council determines that humanity's military capabilities represent an unacceptable threat to galactic security, the bridge went completely silent. Every human officer stopped what they were doing to listen to Commander Chen's response. High Counselor, that would be unfortunate. Humanity values its membership in the galactic community and hopes to contribute positively to galactic civilization for millennia to come. She paused, meeting the High Counselor's gaze directly through the holographic display. However, humanity will not disarm or limit its defensive capabilities based on other species' fears about what we might do with them, even if the Council formally requests such limitations. High Counselor, with all due respect, the Council has no authority to dictate the internal military policies of sovereign member species. That principle has been fundamental to galactic law since the Council's founding. She was right, and everyone knew it. The Hegemony Council's authority extended to mediating disputes between species and coordinating responses to external threats, but they had never claimed the right to limit individual species' military development. Commander, interjected Counselor Vexenari, surely you understand the Council's concern. No single species has ever possessed the capability to unilaterally impose its will on all others. Counselor, no single species has ever needed to possess that capability. But the galaxy has changed. Population growth, resource scarcity, and technological advancement have made conflicts more dangerous and potentially more devastating than ever before. She gestured toward the tactical display, which now showed the positions of hundreds of warships scattered across dozens of star systems. Look at the military buildups happening across the galaxy. The Corvin Third Battle Fleet, the Federation Corps Defense Force, the Altarian Border Guards, the Hegemony Rapid Response Fleet. Everyone is preparing for the next major war, but nobody wants to take responsibility for preventing it. So humanity has appointed itself the galaxy's peacekeeper. Humanity has accepted the responsibility that comes with superior capability. We didn't seek this role, but we won't shirk it either. High Counselor Jekthol leaned forward in his chair, his ancient features creased with concern. Commander, you speak of responsibility and superior capability, but history teaches us that power corrupts. How can the galaxy trust that humanity will always use its capabilities responsibly? High Counselor, you can't. Trust is earned through actions over time, not granted through promises made in a moment of crisis. Chen's voice carried a weight of conviction that made even me, an observer from a completely different species, feel something approaching respect. What you can do is judge us by our results. We prevented a war that would have killed billions. We used the minimum force necessary to achieve that goal. We demanded nothing for ourselves except the preservation of peace. And in the future? In the future, humanity will continue to act according to our principles. Protect the innocent, preserve the peace and defend ourselves and our allies against those who would use force to achieve illegitimate goals. The council session continued for another hour, but the fundamental positions had been established. Humanity would not be dictated to or disarmed, but they. 6 months later, I was back on Vilaria Prime, staring at my completed report and wondering how to convey the magnitude of what I had witnessed to beings who hadn't experienced it themselves. The document had grown to over 3,000 pages, filled with tactical analyses, psychological profiles, strategic assessments, and cultural observations that painted a picture of humanity that no one in the galactic community was prepared to accept. The official inquiry into the Sherinsod 39 incident had concluded, with a formal commendation for the Terran Alliance's decisive peacekeeping action. The territorial dispute between the Corvins and Federation had been resolved through binding arbitration, exactly as the humans had demanded. Both species had quietly begun diplomatic overtures to Earth, apparently recognizing the value of having humanity as an ally rather than an adversary, but the real changes were happening beneath the surface of official galactic politics. Intelligence. Reports crossing my desk indicated that virtually every major civilization was conducting urgent reviews of their military capabilities and strategic doctrines. The revelation that humanity possessed weapons capable of destroying any target in a star system within seconds had fundamentally altered every species' understanding of what was possible in modern warfare. Some civilizations were attempting to develop countermeasures to human weapons, though early reports suggested they were making little progress. Others were quietly approaching human diplomats about defense agreements and mutual assistance pacts. A few of the more aggressive species had simply gone silent, apparently deciding that discretion was preferable to attracting human attention. The most significant change was in the Hegemony Council itself. For the first time in over a millennium, they were seriously discussing the establishment of a permanent galactic peacekeeping force. The proposal, originally submitted by the Altarian Supremacy, called for a multinational fleet with standardized equipment and unified command structure. What made the proposal interesting was that it specifically requested human participation in leadership roles. Observer Zekthul, my supervisor, Director Malketh, materialized in my office via hologram. I've reviewed your preliminary report on the human military observation assignment. Some of your conclusions seem rather extreme, Director. I assure you that every observation and analysis in that report is based on direct witness, testimony, and documented evidence. You claim that a 12-ship human force successfully intimidated over 800 enemy vessels into complete withdrawal without firing more than a single shot. That is correct. You further claim that humanity possesses approximately 10,000 warships, each equipped with weapons capable of destroying any known vessel class. Based on statements from human command personnel, yes. And you conclude that humanity has become the de facto supreme military power in the galaxy, capable of imposing its will on any other species or combination of species. I hesitated before answering, knowing that my response would likely determine the course of my career and possibly influence galactic policy for decades to come. Director, humanity has become the supreme military power in the galaxy. However, they have shown no inclination to impose their will for personal gain. Their intervention in J7739 was genuinely motivated by a desire to prevent catastrophic war. But you also note in your cultural analysis that humans are apex predators with an evolutionary psychology oriented toward competition and dominance, or that is true. But they have channeled those instincts toward maintaining galactic stability, rather than personal aggrandizement. Director Malketh studied my image through the holographic interface, his expression unreadable. Observer, are you recommending that the Valerian Collective alter its strategic relationship with humanity? Director, I am recommending that the Valerian Collective, and indeed all galactic civilizations, recognize that the era of traditional power politics is over. Humanity has redefined what military supremacy means, and we must adapt our diplomatic and strategic approaches accordingly. And if humanity decides to use its military superiority for conquest rather than peacekeeping, then the galaxy is lost anyway, regardless of what we do to prepare. No conventional military force can stand against human weapons technology. Our only rational strategy is to ensure that humanity continues to view us as allies rather than threats. The conversation continued for another hour, but I could see that Director Malketh was beginning to accept the reality of the situation. The Valerian Collective, like every other galactic civilization, would have to acknowledge humanity's new status and adjust their policies accordingly. 3 days later, I received an unexpected communication from Commander Chen herself. "Observer Zekthul," she said via long-range quantum transmission, "I understand you've completed your report on our operations in J7739. I wanted to thank you for your professionalism during what I know was a difficult assignment." "Commander, may I ask how you knew about my report?" "Observer, one of the things you learned about humans is that we're very good at gathering intelligence. We've been monitoring galactic reactions to our intervention, including official reports filed by various government observers. The implications sent a chill through my exoskeleton. If humans were capable of monitoring secure government communications across the galaxy, their intelligence capabilities were even more advanced than their military technology. I wanted to address some concerns that have apparently been raised about human intentions," Chen continued. "Several governments seem worried that we might use our military advantages for territorial expansion or political domination. Those concerns are understandable, Commander. Your species has demonstrated capabilities that exceed anything previously seen in galactic civilization. Observer, I want you to understand something about human psychology that may not have been clear during your observation period. Humans don't want to rule other species. We find the idea exhausting and largely pointless. Commander, think about it logically. We have access to unlimited resources through our technology. We have no population pressure driving territorial expansion. We have no cultural imperative to spread our beliefs or systems to others. What would we gain from conquest that we don't already possess?" The question was more profound than it initially appeared. Most galactic conflicts were driven by resource scarcity, population pressure, or ideological differences. If humanity had solved the first two problems and felt no compulsion toward the third, their motivations for military action would be fundamentally different from other species. "What humans want," Chen continued, "is to live in a galaxy where conflicts are resolved through negotiation rather than genocide, where technological advancement benefits everyone rather than being used to create ever more destructive weapons, where our children can explore the stars without fear of encountering civilizations bent on conquest and domination. And you believe your military superiority can create such a galaxy? Observer, our military superiority has already begun creating such a galaxy. The Corvan Federation conflict was resolved in hours rather than years. The Altarian border tensions have cooled significantly since both sides realized we're watching. 3 separate territorial disputes have been submitted to voluntary arbitration rather than escalating to warfare." She was right. Intelligence reports over the past 6 months showed a marked decrease in military tensions throughout the galaxy. Species that had been preparing for war were instead seeking diplomatic solutions, apparently recognizing that human intervention made conventional warfare obsolete. But what happens when other species develop weapons comparable to yours? Observer, we certainly hope they do. The galaxy would be much safer if every civilization possessed the capability to defend itself effectively. Our goal isn't to maintain military supremacy forever. It's to maintain peace until everyone is strong enough that war becomes impossible, rather than inevitable. The transmission ended, leaving me to contemplate the full implications of what I had learned. Humanity hadn't just developed superior weapons. They had developed a completely different approach to interstellar relations. They were using their military supremacy not to dominate others, but to create conditions where domination itself became unnecessary. I spent the next several weeks reviewing every piece of available intelligence about human activities since the J7739 incident. What I found confirmed Commander Chen's statements. Human military forces had intervened in 6 other potential conflicts, each time with the same result: rapid de-escalation, negotiated settlements, and no human territorial or economic gains. More significantly, humans had begun sharing certain non-military technologies with other species. Medical advances, agricultural improvements, environmental restoration techniques, and manufacturing innovations were being distributed freely throughout the galaxy. The humans were using their technological advantages to improve galactic civilization rather than exploit it. When I filed my final report, I included a recommendation that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier, that the Valerian Collective should actively seek closer ties with humanity, not as a subordinate ally, but as a partner in reshaping galactic civilization.